All right, as Nate mentioned today, we're going over another Revit workflow here, Revit Express Tool workflow. And as always, I'm going to start out with what some of the issues are so you have an idea of why we're doing this in the first place. So I currently have a library that's got some content issues. It's the out-of-the-box 2016 library from Autodesk. And the reason why I feel it has issues is because I really want that library to schedule. Now, I'm going to be talking today about some furniture because I was working recently with an interior designer who wanted to schedule some furniture, and there is a schedule that they have that talks about the width, height, depth, and length of different objects. And most of the furniture out of the box has width, depth, height, or length parameters, not necessarily all four, but it has some of those parameters, and they've wanted to go through and fix them. Now, you may have other parameters in your library. You might be working with the MEP library. There's a ton of different areas where you might be working, where you've got areas where the schedule just isn't filling out properly, your content isn't working consistently. And this workflow I'm going to talk about today can help you fix that. Now, the biggest problem here is that there's a lot of parameters that don't match my standards or this other company's standards. Either somebody's acquired a company, they're using manufacturer content, you're using out-of-the-box Autodesk content that doesn't necessarily have shared parameters in it. It's just family parameters for the most part. And there's a lot of family content that's usually based on those parameters or varying standards. And to go through, if I was going to go through that library manually and fix it, it'd be a bit tedious. Now, in today's example, it's going to be about 40-something families, 45 families, I believe, that I want to go through and fix. And manual correction, that 45 families to go through and fix all 45 probably would take me about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And I don't really have an hour and a half, 2 hours to sit there and manually correct those. So what I'm going to do is normally it would take me about 5 minutes to set this up and run it, and in a total of about 6 to 7 minutes, including setup time, it would be done. That's a little bit more efficient. So let's take a look at this. Now, before I go into this, I'm actually going to skip the first little demonstration here. I'm going to go directly to there's two solution portions here. One of the solutions is making sure your shared parameter file is in good condition. We've done other webinars before on Shared Parameter Manager. It's used to fix your parameter file, to merge two parameter files, to go through and kind of do some corrections and updates there. As far as Family Processor goes, we're going to be using that today in this webinar to go through and update the family content with modified, with parameters that are in our actively fixed shared parameter file. So we'll see how that's going to work here in a moment. So again, Shared Parameter Manager, easy fixing, easily find parameters, rename your parameters, modify your data types on your parameters, and you can drag and drop, organize your shared parameter file. Again, we've got other webinars on that. We're skipping that one today. We're jumping directly into Family Processor. This one allows you to make a lot of changes to a lot of families, as many changes as you want, and modifying things like materials, modifying parameters, resorting them, modifying how their formulas are set up if that's important to you, changing parameters from family to shared parameters. And the nice thing about this family processor is this is repeatable. So maybe you're downloading manufacturer content consistently. You're going back to the same source for this content. Generally speaking, within a single manufacturer, they're pretty consistent with how they put their content together. If that's the case, and hopefully that's the case, you can definitely save some settings. So if you're constantly going back to Herman Miller or Steelcase and you download different portions of their libraries at different times, you can continually rerun your settings from Family Processor against downloaded libraries. You can also use this internally to continually run against your own library in case there's a number of updates coming from a number of different sources to be able to continually update your content. So with that, let's jump directly into Revit and take a look at how this is going to work. Now, keep in mind, I'm using the out-of-the-box content. So I'm going to go ahead and run the open command here. This is my default library here. I'm in C Program Data, Autodesk Revit 2016, Libraries, US Imperial. When you install Revit, by default, your library will go right there, and you'll have the same library that I've got. So you can actually run pretty much this exact same process. Now, today I'm going to be working on furnitures and furniture systems. I want them to schedule the same so I can build a multi-category schedule and put them both into the same schedule. That's my ideal workflow here. So I can have, because I know Revit separates the two, but as an interior designer working with that team, they wanted to put both into the same library, even though they might be classified a little bit differently. So I'm going to open up a piece of furniture. In this case, I'm just going to grab the first one that I see, TV stand. Perfect. I'll use that one. In fact, I think I happened that one last time. So I'm going to open this up and just kind of take a look at what's inside of there. And I have browsed this library through a couple of times and looked at a couple of different pieces of content just to be sure that they're all, for the most part, pretty consistent. And for the most part, they are, with the exception of a few materials here and there that are different and custom family by family, which I could even go through and fix that if I really cared to. Now, what I'm going to do is open up the Family Types dialog box, and you'll see here depth, width, and height. And those are the three parameters, that and length, that I want to fix and possibly finish if other families have finish. I might add material in there too in case another family happens to use material. If there's anything specific to the family like countertop material, well, in that case, if there's multiple materials, I'll just ignore those for now, and I can come back and fix those in a different way. I believe on Thursday we have a webinar about Parameter Jammer. We'll talk about that tool and how this can help that workflow as well. But this is kind of more mass fixing across the entire library. All right, so I've got the parameters. I have an idea of what it is I want to switch out. This is a relatively lightweight family. It's kind of why I'm using it today for today's example. It'll be a really quick process. You can obviously do this on much more complex families as well. Today there won't be any formulas in use either, but you can certainly leverage this with formulas as well, and I'll show you where that'll happen inside of the Family Processor tool. So here on the Revit Express Tools ribbon, I'm going to go into Family Processor. It's on the CTC BIM Manager suite right here. So here's Family Processor. We'll open this up. And from the Family Processor, I'm going to go ahead and do some basic family level processing on these. Now, out of the box, sometimes those parameters aren't sorted very neatly. They might have just saved it forward from a previous version of Revit. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I sort my parameters by name within groups, if at all possible. So we'll go ahead and sort those. Also, when I'm opening up family files and I'm actually running the processing, I like to just make sure that I always audit. That's a personal preference. I always turn this on. So whenever I'm doing multiple processing, I can guarantee that I'm auditing my content. Now, by the way, if you are using this on your libraries, I happen to be in Revit 2016 right now. If you're using this on your libraries to update from 2014 or 2015, I guarantee you want this turned on. It'll take just a millisecond longer for it to open up most families, but what it'll do is it'll help with that migration forward, that upgrade process, to help ensure that there's no corruption in the content. And that's really important. We actually had some issues with this recently. So definitely turn on auditing when you're upgrading your content. Most of the other tools out there that do something sort of similar to Family Processor, they don't have things like auto sort parameters and groups and automatically audit. This also has the ability to go through and process the family's internal settings as well, so that all those family level properties over here, like the work plane based or always vertical, you can change those if you want to modify what they're going to be. In this case, I'm not going to make any changes to those properties because I feel like out of the box, most of the furniture families are pretty decent. So I'm not going to update whatever their setting is right now. I might come back later on and make that change, but for now, it's fine. I can go through and do some things with materials. I can change some materials. Now, when I'm working with materials, sometimes families have extra garbage materials inside of them. Now, this family here is pretty clean, but I can't guarantee that all of the families out of the box are going to be nice and clean. So, and I don't remember exactly what those materials were. So what I'm going to do is go here into Options, and in the Options of Family Processor, there's a setting that I usually just leave turned on. It says automatically delete the following materials if found. There's a whole bunch of materials that by default exist in most families, especially if you edit them out of a project. So earth, glass, phase demo, all these different types of materials that usually aren't being used by most families. Maybe glass is being used, but for the most part, the vast majority of the rest of these are probably not being used. You know, this is an unhosted family. For some reason, Revit thinks it's a good idea to give me default wall and default roof if I was to edit this out of a project. This one obviously wasn't. It's pretty clean. But what I'm going to do is just go ahead and check this box, and by doing this checkbox right here, I don't actually have to add those default materials here to the Delete Materials tab. I'm not going to worry about adding any materials or changing any materials, that is changing the name or the RGB or transparency values. I'm going to leave this alone. So as I was mentioning, I do not want to be deleting parameters here. I'm trying to swap some parameters out. That's my goal. So I could go over to the Add Shared Parameters tab and add a couple of parameters to these families as well. If I was going through the process of,
fully updating my library and I wanted to put in some of my own custom parameters, I could certainly add those shared parameters to ensure that it schedules fully so that these out-of-the-box families can, be tagged properly depending if I have custom tags or not. In this case, I'm not going to be doing any adding of shared parameters either. I could also add family parameters, by the way. So you can add either shared or family parameters. If you're going through a series of a certain kind of a library and you know what types of parameters you need, maybe you've got some control parameters in the family, you can certainly add those. That's not what I'm doing right now. My current goal is to fix my library and make it so that the entire thing schedules. So I'm going to do one of the most popular methods here inside the family processor. I'm going to be replacing my current parameters in my families with shared parameters. So I'm going to take depth, finish, height, and width. I'm going to add all 4 of them down below. So I'm going to select all and add all of them below. So I'm going to take each one of them, and I'm going to replace them with an appropriate shared parameter that's coming out of my shared parameter file, which I've already browsed up here at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and take depth right here, and I'm going to go ahead and replace that with depth. So I'm going to, kind of scroll my file here, find depth, and choose that. Now, what Family Processor is doing here when I'm doing the replace with shared parameters is it's making sure that it knows what the parameter type is of the active parameter, and it's only going to present me with that list. Notice here, if I go to my next one, my height parameter down here, and drop this down, you'll see that the first option in the line, because this is a fully developed shared parameter file, is actuator base height. Well, that's not the one I want to use. I want to use height, so I can actually go in there and go find height in my list. In this case, H for height. Choose it, and there's my height parameter. I'm swapping it out for, and I'm doing a 1-for-1, depth for depth, height for height. I'll go down here to width. Again, notice the first one in this list is actuator base height. I'm pointing this out because as I go back up here to the finish parameter, where it says finish, this is a material type of parameter. As I drop this one down, I'm going to go and find in my list here the finish parameter to replace it with. But if you look at the very top of the list, actuator base height is not one of the parameters that's available because this is all materials and finishes. So I'm going to go in there and find finish and replace finish with my finish. So in case I'm scheduling that, that'll be able to be scheduled. We'll take width inside of here. Go down to the end of my list here and go to width. Now I'm missing one. I'm missing length. And some of my families I seem to recall had length in them. I could also select additional family files to use as source information for here. I could actually select all of them if I really wanted to. And add all of my entire process library to this list and then choose from them which parameters I want to swap out. In this case, I happen to know that length was one of the parameters, so I'm going to go ahead and type that in. Now, it is important that I type it in the same as it is in the original family, which is capital L and lowercase hank. I'm going to go to the parameter type here and make sure that I choose the right data type for this so that it knows it's supposed to be a length type parameter so I can swap out for other length type parameters, and I'll add that down below. So here's my length parameter. I'm going to swap this one out. So go in there and find length in my list. So I'm swapping out depth for depth, height, length, and width for their appropriate parameters. I've got finish here swapped out for finish. I'm going to do one more. I'm going to do material, just in case I find material in one of those families. It's one of those popular ones that's pretty common. So choose material type of parameter, add that down below, and swap that out for material. If I have it. I believe I have material. There we go. Now, this particular process right here could be used across an entire library of content because most families have in some form depth, height, length, or width. There might also be thickness. Actually, I'll go ahead and add that one as well, just in case it happens to exist. So we'll put thickness inside of here, and once again, that is going to be a length type parameter. Length, add that down below, and I believe I also in my shared parameter file have thickness. So we'll go ahead and grab, there it is, thickness. All right, so I've got these all in my list. Swapping thickness for thickness, depth, height, length, yep, got everything that I wanted. The next step here, the final step to this full workflow is to go over here and select some families and begin my processing. Now, I happen to have already browsed to my furniture system once before. What I'm going to do is actually back this out one folder and take a look at the entire U.S. Imperial folder. So if I look at that, you're going to see I can pull every single family from my entire library into this list. If I really wanted to process everything, I could do that. I probably would want to do it over lunch hour and then, come back and see what the update was. But in this case, what I want to do is scroll down until I find the furniture folder here. Down at the detail items, we got, there we go, there's some furniture. And the reason why I'm doing this, because I want the furniture and furniture systems at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and grab furniture system. Now the furniture folder has a bunch of subfolders. I'm going to show you what I can do with this, specifically if I was doing some upgrading. Now I'm going to go ahead and use my shift key and grab all of the furniture content here, including the TV stand that I'm in right now. I'm going to add all those files down below. It's 40-something odd files. I can't remember the exact count, but it'll tell me here in just a moment. I'm going to take all of these files right here, and I'm going to process them. Now down below there's a couple of really important options. Even if some of these don't require a change to them for whatever reason, if they're already right, I'm going to resave them anyway. So even if there's no changes, I'm going to go ahead and resave it. And this is very useful for those of you who are going through the process of upgrading your content. Because if you're going from one version to the next, 2014 to 2015 or 2015 to 16 or whatever, this will upgrade, and when it opens up and saves your family, it'll also compact it automatically when it saves it to a new folder. So that's a nice little feature there. If you're also upgrading, and for today's purposes, I'm going to do this because I don't want to actually modify my original Revit library right here. What I'll probably do is save this to an alternate parent folder. So I'm going to choose this option here, and we'll put this on my desktop. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder right now off on the side of my other monitor, and I'm going to put today's date on it. So today is what, 2015-06-23, I believe. So I'm going to choose that -families. Typing that out right now. I'm going to open up this folder here for you. So right here is my 2015-06-23 families folder. This is on my desktop out here. Right there's that folder. I'm going to keep this up on screen. When I click over to the background window here, Revit's going to come in front of it, but I'll pull it back forward as Revit's processing. You'll be able to see kind of what's going on here. I'll have it just a little bit up to the side since my Revit window is not maximized. So with the family processor now, I'm telling it to save to an alternate parent folder. Let me browse to that particular folder real quick here. It's this 2015-06-23 families folder. It's going to save these families even if nothing is needed for changes. And I'm going to go ahead and I could tell it, by the way, also to only tell me when there was problems with what it swapped out, where it couldn't make a change. For today's purposes, I'm going to tell it on this last log file over here. I'm going to have it log everything that it did do and everything it did not do. It's going to log everything, a very long list of things it could and couldn't do. But I'm going to tell it to go ahead and begin processing here. Once you begin this, by the way, notice what it says, it can't be stopped. So you want to make sure you've got a computer that's going to be able to do this if you're going to be processing an entire library for a little bit of time, that you can, step away and do something else, or, that you can leave the computer unattended for a little while. Now, in this case, I'm processing 40-some-odd families. It takes it about 60 seconds to do this. It's not actually that long. So I'm going to go ahead and begin the processing. Oh, wait a minute. Can't do it just yet. Revit has found a family that's open that actually is in my list. My TV stand is open, and it can't process this family if it's actively open in my current session. So I'm just going to shut down Family Processor. Now, before you kind of freak out and go, oh, save your settings. I don't actually need to save my settings right now. I'm doing this as a one-off. If I wanted to save these settings, I sure could, and I could recall them later if I was going to do some other settings in the middle before I actually process this. But when you just make some settings inside of Family Processor, you can just shut it down, and it remembers what you had done. So I'm going to close this family. I'm going to start a new family. Nope, that's a new project. Cancel. New family. We'll just use a generic model. I'm not even going to save it. I'm just going to open it up so I have one sitting here. You have to be in a family file for Family Processor to be able to run successfully. So it doesn't have to be a save family. It just has to be a family. So over here in my Select Families and Begin, it remembered all the families that I'd added. So it has that in my list already. On my changed parameters, it remembered the settings that I put inside of here to replace it with certain shared parameters. On my change materials, I wasn't doing anything here, even though you can see some of those default garbage materials. I'm not using those at all in my current process. I am going through the options and replacing, or rather deleting the junk materials if they happen to be found for those common ones that we know usually exist. In fact, in my list here, you'll notice that default wall and default roof are one of those materials. So it's already going to be handling that here with my options file. This is just the out-of-the-box template file here. So let's go to this begin processing over here. And even remember the path that I've got going on to my desktop. I'm telling you that I'm going to this 2015 families folder here, saving it to the alternate parent folder. This did search all subfolders, and when it saves this alternate folder, I'm going to go ahead and begin processing for this. It's going to tell me what it's going to do. I'll talk about that in the background while it's running, actually. You can see it's going to do sort the parameters, audit it as it opens it up, deletes all those materials if it can, replaces these parameters down here, and then it even saves it if nothing's needed, saving it to the alternate parent folder. So I'm going to go ahead and tell it to continue, and I've got over here on a different monitor, see if I can pull this across for you. No, I can't. Okay, well, it's over there processing anyway. When it's saving to this alternate parent folder here, what it's going to do is rebuild the directory structure inside of there. You see here it's got furniture and furniture system already in the mix. By the way, it's already on family number 10 right now of 46 families. So it's going through these folders. It's building all of the subfolders up. It's saving each individual family, migrating it forward, and making those changes to it. So it's doing all of that on the fly as it finds each of those individual families. It's already about halfway through. Takes it about a minute. So if you have any questions at this point about the process that we've done today, certainly feel free to throw those into the question queue, and I would be more than happy to answer those while this is kind of finishing up the processing. Now, the nice thing about the family processor is you can quite literally set it up, tell it to run, and walk away, leaving it completely unattended. Recently, I was working with a client. We had about 5,000 families to process. We're doing something very similar to what we're doing today, which was going through and just kind of correcting a library. What we wanted to do is just make sure things like width, depth, height, thickness, and a couple of other parameters, a number of other parameters, were all consistent across their entire library of about 5,000 families. And in that process, obviously we didn't have the time to have a person sit there and check every single one of those 5,000 pieces of content. So we gave it family processor, we set it up, told to run, walked away, and after about 2 hours, we came back and it was done. I have no idea exactly how long it took, doesn't matter. It was done by the time I came back. So it had ripped through 5,000 families in about 2 hours. That's pretty impressive. And then, obviously we had a full library of content that was all ready to go. We also used it to do some migrating forward. So in this case, you can see it's now done over here. It's gone to the last log tab. My process window on my other screen has all finished. 46 families in a matter of, maybe a minute and a half, actually, in this case. So it went through every single one of those families, saved it forward. You can see the saved date and time here is today. Right now, 12:24 Central Time. Gone through every single one of those in all those folders and recreated the subfolder structure as it was in the original folder. So what it will do here, it'll tell me for every single family that it did process. In this case, the first one here was the original cube panel family. So it went through and it found these materials and it deleted them. It deleted default light source, default roof, default wall, deleted glass and poche. It did not delete these other materials because they were not in the family. It tells me that. A material with this name was not found in the document. So it didn't have these, and that's okay. It let me know that didn't do it. But then it went through and it said parameters replaced with shared parameters. It replaced thickness. I'm glad I added that one. It replaced height, replaced length. That was one that I manually added as well. It didn't find depth, finish, width, or material, so it couldn't replace those, and that's okay. But it did go through and it sorted my parameters at the very end, so it sorted thickness, height, and length alphabetically in the dimensions group, hopefully in the dimensions group, and then it saved the family to the new directory. So it told me where it was up here in the old directory, and then it told me it did a save as basically and saved it to this new folder. And for every single family that it went through, the overhead shelving module, it went through and did all those exact same things again. And once again, depth, height, and length all got replaced. The other parameters, in this case thickness, was not in that family. Each one of these I can go through and just kind of take a look and see, what did you do? Oh, you replaced those three. Fantastic. Oh, you replaced those three. That's great. So I can find out what it was actually doing. In this case, this workstation cubicle family, I might want to go back and revisit this one because I'm looking here. I just might make a note in my notebook here. Workstation cubicle RSA didn't have any parameter replacements whatsoever. So it might have a couple of extra parameters in it or differently named parameters for its flexibility. I might want to go back and touch that one by hand, but now I know that this is one that was potentially an issue, that it won't schedule correctly. As I'm going down my list here, I can kind of just browse through and kind of see what else I've got. Width and length got replaced. This one here might need something else depending on what it is. The bed box, okay, so maybe height doesn't matter. Maybe there was an elevation parameter on it, and I care about going back and modifying that one. So again, this just kind of gives you a list. You can copy this to clipboard so you can come back and reference it later on. You can delete a bunch of the stuff that you don't care about, and you can make an action plan for fixing up the rest of the content. But ultimately, this went through each of those families, and they're now all shared parameters because, at least the ones that I swapped out. Now let me open up that TV stand again. I'm going to open this one up this time from my desktop because that's where I saved it. So here's my desktop. Here's my 2015 06 23 families. And in the furniture directory, here's that TV stand. If I open this one up and I take a look at it, in the family parameter properties here, width, depth, and height still exist just as they did before, but now they're actually in alphabetical order because it did sort them. And if I modify one of these parameters, it tells me it's a shared parameter. I can't export it, don't need to. The reason I can't export it is because it is already in my shared parameter file, which is great. Now I could reselect to a new one if I really wanted to, but it's in my current shared parameter file. That means it's my shared parameter. And it's, you know, in dimensions, it's grouped there, that's fine. So it's got all the settings that I really care for it to have. Modify width again, same thing. The shared parameter, it's in the correct shared parameter file. Finish, same thing. It's already got that going on. And if I take a look at the materials here, if there were any junk materials in this family, I don't think that there were, but if this one had any junk materials, it's already gone through and cleaned those up for me. So it only has the two that I really care about.